And now I am pleased to welcome to the stage Gary Wederspahn, and he's going to tell me if I pronounced his name correctly. Gary's been an active supporter of the Death with Dignity movement since the 1980s. And so he's involved in quite a few different organizations, but he's going to provide us with some dialogue for our discussion today on ethical and practical considerations regarding end of life decisions. So, Gary, if you want to jump on the stage by turning on your mic and camera, and welcome. I know we have been talking about having you on here for the last several months. I'm glad we finally made it happen. And before we dive into an end of life discussion, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to this this specialty as a resource.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to share these resources with all the participants. And I would also like to say that if people have too many questions for us to deal with today, I'd be happy to provide you with my personal email address if folks want to follow up. I care so much about this, I'm happy to do that. Well, my background. Well, I was born in 1940, and back then, 80% of the people in the United States died at home, surrounded by loved ones, and it was a family and a natural, sometimes a religious event, but it certainly wasn't institutionalized or medicalized. Nowadays, we have just the totally opposite. 80% of the people die in institutions of various kinds and in circumstances that are pretty much out of our control. So that's the backdrop. As a young person, I went overseas with the Peace Corps and other international development agencies, and I lived and worked in countries where death was simply a natural part of life. There was no taboo as we have here in the United States. And I came back after almost 20 years, mostly with the Peace Corps, running Peace Corps programs around the world and focusing on human rights issues. I came back to my own country and I thought, my God, but when I talk about death here, it's almost like, bad juju, don't bring it up, big taboo. And so that got me very interested in this whole death with dignity movement. Then here in Minnesota, where I live, there was a woman in my own county, about 20 miles away, who decided to end her own 10 years of untreatable pain and suffering. She had a neurological condition, and she finally got the book Final Exit. She found out the practicalities of how to end her suffering, and she did. And the local county attorney wanted to make a name for himself, I guess, and he hauled Final Exit Network, the organization that I'm now on the board of, into court in my own county and sued the organization for $30,000 for assisting in a suicide, simply because of the information that was in that book, and that book was recommended to her. So that really pissed me off, frankly. It hit all my civil rights hot buttons, and so I joined Final Exit Network back in the late 90s, I guess, early 2000. And I've been on the board and a strong activist ever since then. That's where I come from.
Okay, great. Well, I think you shared a PowerPoint with me, which I'm gonna run for you today. Hopefully you can see that on the screen, Gary, because if you can see it, then everybody can see it.
Great.
Okay.
Well, the slides, I invite people to chime in through their chat boxes anytime they want to make a comment or a question. The slides will kind of just move us through this. But the point is that positive aging, which is your passion, Steve, also implies positive dying at the end of that process. It's inevitable. And so it's a quest really to find out and prepare for and define for ourselves what is a good death. So that'd be the focus of the talk today. It's our right to have a good death. What is a good death in America today? I have all the experiences abroad, but when back here in the States, I see that we've created an end-of-life system, care system, that makes it somewhat, I would say very difficult actually to navigate and to achieve a good death on your own terms. That's what we're talking about today. Next slide. So, a good death. A lot of the laws that have been passed are called death with dignity laws. That means as free from pain as much as possible and suffering, emotional and physical suffering at the end of life, and in a way that is respectful of the choices, the autonomy of the person who is dying. That's how I would call a good death. So the whole death with dignity movement, the right to die movement, essentially started in 1980 with the Hemlock Society. We older folks probably remember the Hemlock Society. And it was focused also right in the beginning on a good death. What is a good death and how does it a capstone of a good life? And the book, the seminal book that started the whole movement and was very controversial in the beginning was written by Derek Humphrey, a British journalist living here in the United States at that point in time. This book was on the New York Times bestseller list for months and months. And what made it controversial was it had a chapter dealing with the practicalities of self-deliverance. That's a euphemism for ending your own life, pulling your own plug. And that particular information being provided to people was highly controversial at the time. It empowered people, but it also scared a lot of authorities that felt that that type of information should not be made publicly available. The book's now in its, I think, 4th edition. I highly recommend it. It's available as an ebook and also in every library that you'll want to go into. But make sure you get a more recent edition because the issues, the laws, the practicalities have changed. Next slide. So here's the history of the movement in the United States. Final Exit Network, I'm a board member, is one of the successors. We have 2 successors that came out of the original Hemlock Society, and I'm active. I support both, actually. But Final Exit Network is the one that deals directly with individuals and their families and practitioners on the practicalities of how you can implement your own decisions about how you want to end your life. Compassion and Choices, which is a much larger organization, is aimed at changing the laws or introducing laws in the United States to provide physician aid in dying. It's mostly lobbying is the main effort. So these are the 2 organizations. Next slide. So coming back to the US here, how do we die these days in the United States? Stanford Medical School has done a lot of research on this. And I like this picture. This slide shows somebody who's having a death that I would not call a good death, but unfortunately it's very common in the ICU to have people hooked up to all kinds of tubes and electrodes and not much in control of what's happening to them. And their own interests may very likely not be paid much attention to, which is unfortunate when we are at our most vulnerable time in our life, actually, to have our autonomy and our freedom of choice limited in this way. Next slide. So, what is good death? How should we die? Life starts with birth. We live, we die. It's all one experience. It's inevitable, and we should, I think, try to have our ultimate time on this planet of one of care, beauty, respect, peace. Next slide. Okay, so it comes down to me. I'm going back to my years as an activist and both in civil rights and human rights. The right to choose is extremely important to me. And I like this slide, Steve, but I also don't like it very much because it looks like me lying there in that bed with my right to choose sign. But it also shows who the usual opponents of our right to choose, who these are. And you can see the politicians standing there who represent many interests that are opposing our right to choose for ourselves. You see the medical representative there, who they have procedures and policies and systems that reduce our ability to decide what happens. And then we have the religious authorities who feel like it's not our choice about how and when that we die. So these are the three elements that we need to continually deal with when we're trying to assert our rights to choose. Next slide. So the American public generally agrees with us, with me, that we should have this right. The Gallup polls continually show more than 72, 73% of the population saying, yes, we want the physician aid in dying laws. These are called death with dignity laws. Sometimes they're called medical aid in dying. They're all based on the original law that passed over 20 years ago in Oregon, the general model. But anyway, if all the people, a large percentage of the population is in favor of this, why don't we have that law passed all across the country? Next slide. Here's the picture now. Currently, aid in dying laws are in existence in 10 jurisdictions. States and Washington, D.C. New Mexico just recently passed their law, and this covers about 20% of the US population currently. This is where Compassion and Choices is trying very hard to continue to lobby for the passage of this laws. Final Exit Network also supports that, but our main focus is on the individual people and their family members rather than the legal situation. So doctors who are insiders in this system know how this system works. So that's a good question to ask. How would doctors, I think we have a few doctors in attendance today. How do doctors want to die? Next slide. Well, this is a study done by also by Stanford Medical School. They surveyed 1,081 MDs and asked them, if you were facing the end of life and suffering, and you were in the hospital with no opportunity, no chance for improvement, essentially like that poor soul in the earlier slide, all hooked up and everything. What would you want or not want? What interventions do you want? And you can see on this slide that a very high percentage of them hardly don't want anything. They want to be relieved. They don't want CPR, ventilation, feeding tubes, even antibiotics. But when you get to the palliative care, the pain medication, boom, they're back up to almost 90% again. So relief from the pain and suffering. And another study, I don't have a slide for it, but it shows that physicians generally get to hospice sooner than the general public. So this is what they know, this is what they would like. Now, when I was giving this talk in New Mexico, actually, a physician stood up and said, it's not our fault. We have protocols to follow. We are employees of these medical institutions. So we don't have an option other than to do what the authorities in our medical institutions require us to do. This is what we would want for ourselves. And we would like to help people have more options. So it's not the physician's fault. Next slide. However, the physicians are put in a very tough position. Even the medical technologies have advanced to the point where we can be kept dying for a long, long time, far beyond the point where we as individuals or even the physician would feel like it's appropriate. But there we are. It's not prolonged living, it's prolonged dying that we're trying to give people the option of an off-ramp. Next slide. Now, there are a lot of different ways to die that even the states in which there are physician aid in dying laws, people will not be qualified for, because there are many different medical conditions that prohibit people from taking advantage of those laws. They can't actually do what's required, or they're not dying fast enough to meet the 6-month terminal diagnosis by 2 physicians. I'm on this list. I have a diagnosis of congestive heart failure and dementia is a growing epidemic in this country as we get older. Just yesterday, a friend of mine in my church men's group died with Alzheimer's, and his wife called today and said it was just a terrible, terrible way to go. So we've really got to find options that would allow people to have more say, more control, more autonomy. These laws, the Oregon law, for example, when it was put into place, requires an annual survey of people who are utilizing or planning on utilizing the law, and ask them what aspects of end of life are most disturbing to them. And it's not pain and suffering. It's not the terrible costs, financial costs involved. The number one thing that bothers people most consistently year after year is a loss of personal autonomy. It's my life. Why do other people feel like that they have the right to tell me what's going to happen, what's not going to happen? Number one complaint. So that's what we're talking about. That's what Final Exit Network, good slide. That's what we're trying to do, is give people information and empowerment to decide what happens to them at the end. Next slide. Okay, here's our vision statement. Basically what I've said earlier about the option to die legally and peacefully. Our mission is basically education. We provide all kinds of information, tools, resources free of charge to anybody who wishes to become educated and understand what their options truly are. Education. Next slide. We also do research to find what the current options are. We do bioethical research to explore the spiritual and the ethical and the moral dimensions of this. And we have lawyers who will defend people's right to choose when their advance directives are being blocked or are not honored. Next slide. We focus on the issues of dementia. Just recently, well, about a year ago now, we put together a team of bioethicists, lawyers, physicians, hospice chaplain, to produce an advance directive specifically oriented toward people who feel like dementia may be an issue that would limit their choice. This tool is also freely available to people, and it comes with legal services in case it's been disregarded. I'll talk a little more about that later. As an organization, Final Exit Network is very, very careful to stay on the right side of the law. In every state in this country, assisting in a suicide is illegal. And Final Exit Network does not assist in any way, does not recommend, does not encourage. It simply provides information, counseling, and knowledge. We do, however, defend our right to talk about this and write about it and give these presentations. In my state of Minnesota, we still have a lawsuit pending on our First Amendment right to provide this information to people who request it. Next slide. So here's how it works. Anybody can contact us via email, go to our website, phone, and those who are interested in finding out the practicalities and using what we call exit guide services. Exit guides are highly trained counselors, basically, who talk people through the whole process. Hundreds of hours of phone consultation. Most of those, a large percentage of those people end up deciding not to pursue their exit or to end their lives in any form. It's just a matter of figuring out what the options are and moving on. Those few that do then submit their medical records to Final Exit Network. We have a medical evaluation team of doctors and a psychiatrist who review all the applications. And if those few that are approved will be assigned an exit guide, and then that educational program over the telephone is done. Now, none of this is of any cost to any person. We're entirely supported. I'm a volunteer. All of our board members, all of our speakers, all of our researchers, everybody is a volunteer. And our costs of providing this information are entirely provided by our donors. The next slide. So let's go to the next slide, Steve. We also provide, those of you who are in attendance today can get a free membership for 1 year in Final Exit Network simply by using this email address. And that will give you a free year subscription to our magazine, and that'll start and be very helpful, I would think, in educating yourself on all these different issues. Next slide. A new service that we have put together recently, we hired a professional consultant who works to train and support surrogates. These are, they're called medical power of attorney in some states. These are people who will be speaking for you when you're unable to speak for yourself, and they are designated in your advance directive. In some cases, people have difficulty finding the right person or finding any person. So we will provide a free consultation from this professional for anybody who wishes to access that service. Again, just go to the website, finalexitnetwork.org, and go to the, click on the Surrogate Consulting service and take it from there. Now, earlier I talked about the dementia issue. We have this a special advance directive. It's a supplement that would go with your current advance directive, and I certainly hope you have one. Compassion and Choices has some data on their recent data, 2019 data, I believe, that only 38% of the people in this country actually have a written advance directive. So that would be job one, to make sure you have an advance directive, and it clearly says what your wishes are and who is going to represent you. However, if you have any issue or are concerned that dementia might be a problem, then this supplement was designed to deal with that. We gave it a terrible name. It's called SAD, Supplemental Advance Directive for Dementia. It's also available on our website. Next slide. We also have another free service that all people who join Final Exit Network and become members, we pay for a free registration with the U.S. Living Will Registry. So your advance directive can be uploaded and then downloaded if you should need it at any medical institution. Unfortunately, I had to test this last year when my wife fell on the ice and was in intensive care for 2 days. And we were able to get the hospital to download her advance directive, get it into her medical records. We have a little card in her wallet that was provided by Final Exit Network. This would be very handy to have if you're not carrying your advance directive around with you or have it freely available. Next slide. Okay, so I want to, these are some of the resources, places to learn more about this whole range of issues and topics and challenges and choices. And I want to highlight in particular the Good Death Society blog. This blog started it a couple of years ago, and now we've had over 70,000 people blog posts read. And it covers everything you can possibly think of, all the different topics, in the form of short, very well written blog posts, little articles, and they're all stored and categorized so that you can click on any topic, dementia, surrogate, psychedelics and the use of end-of-life care, anything you can possibly think of. and you'll get probably 4 to 8 different, very short, well-written, well-curated articles. I recommend that as a great resource. Next slide, and I think that's going to be the last slide. Again, just go to finalexitnetwork.org and start your process of education. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Well, that was great, Gary, and thank you for covering such a broad resources and topics, and providing us with some of the history on the movement. We have tons of questions, so we're going to jump in here and start addressing those. I've also been really excited to see the great resources that the audience is sharing. Patricia, sharing the Voice My Choice website, which we had a discussion about that. Lots of people talking about compassion and choices, and an organization that is making significant change in this area. And as you, I thought, did a great job of describing some differences and similarities between the Final Exit Network and Compassion and Choices. And people are sharing a bunch of books and resources in chat. So I always like to tell people, when we save this recording, we also post the chat transcript. So don't feel like you need to take notes on the chat there. We'll have a nice fresh copy with all the links for you that you can go back to access along with the recording of this discussion. Okay, so let's start at the beginning of some of these questions here. Somebody asked, just wondering what happened and what was the outcome of the lawsuit filed against the organization called Final Exit. I think in your original story, you talked about that. Do you know what the final outcome of that lawsuit was?
Yes, I was there, and that's what triggered me to join Final Exit Board. We were fined equivalent of $30,000. Donors came immediately and paid because it was basically made it impossible for us to continue to provide our services in the state of Minnesota. Since then, when we've been to court, I think 4 times. Currently, we have a freedom of speech suit pending that we brought against the state of Minnesota. So we still don't have the final word on that. It's ironic that Minnesota is often considered a very progressive state, but in this particular area, it certainly is not.
Great.
But we are still investing our resources in defending this concept. Let me mention the book, Final Exit Network, was the trigger of this lawsuit, basically. Even though our name is Final Exit Network, we would derive nothing from the sale of the book. It's just a book that we highly recommend, and the original author is still on our board, on our advisory board. Derek is still active in his 90s. There's another book I can also recommend. It's called How to Get the Death You Want. A little less technical. It's by Abraham is the name of the author. It's another resource for folks to look at.
Great. And I'm dropping the link to that on Amazon in the chat there.
John Abraham is a
Reverend John Abraham.
He's an Episcopal priest, and he's very, very active in this area as well.
Great. Okay, let's see. Elva asks, are you familiar with the new bill C7 in Canada, which apparently no longer requires a 6-month death sentence and allows doctors the option of providing prescription or phenobarbital or direct injection? If this is not correct, please clarify if you can.
That is correct. The law in Canada is far more comprehensive than the laws, the death with dignity laws in the US. One of the leading proponents, a Canadian MD, will be describing all these changes on a, I guess it's a podcast by Hemlock Society of San Diego. You could go to their website and click on that, and in a few days, there'll be a very good description of that entire process.
Great.
Hemlock
Let's see.
Society of San Diego.
Elva, who asked that question, also said, I referred a friend to the Final Exit Network. He successfully used their services, including having 2 guides who flew to be with him during the process. Everything went smoothly. Very sad to lose him, but it's what I would want for myself under the same circumstance. So
These exit guides are just incredibly compassionate. They're wonderful and very courageous people, and they will be, again, free of charge, come and be there if someone wants to be in a situation where they have people who can, it's like being a death doula. That's another whole resources that we can propose.
And my good friend Val Walker is an end-of-life doula. She's in the audience right now. I saw her posting there. I posted a bunch of links while you were talking, Gary, to the End-of-Life Doula Association, to the Hospice and Palliative Care Foundations and Association, to Compassion and Choices. And there's so many resources out there, but I love having these talks on end of life because for most of us, it's something that we become paralyzed and we feel like, well, if I talk or think about it, it's going to come true. And I always say to folks, yeah, it's going to come true. But if you don't think about it, if you don't have a dialogue, your wishes may not be met in this stage.
Steve, I have a friend that says talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about death won't make you dead. We have to really overcome this taboo in order to be prepared, like good Boy Scouts are.
Yep. Okay. Susan Albert says, I live in a state that does not provide death with dignity, Pennsylvania. Other than moving to one of the 10 states that offer this, what can I do to ensure that I die on my own terms?
Well, I suggest you take advantage of the free Final Exit Network membership and explore your options there. And that would be a choice for people, not only in states that don't have the laws, but even in those states that have laws that prohibit certain kinds of people from being able to use them.
And very clear, you said it more than one time, Final Exit Network is focused on doing everything legally and within the law of the jurisdiction that you live in. But you know, just creating an advance directive, just creating that document is one step that you can do to ensure death with dignity. And I think when we start thinking about sort of the right to die laws and you know, the 6 months and things of that nature, of course, that's a more extreme step, and it's an option. But there's lots of things that we can all do, no matter what the law is in our states, in addition to working with Compassion and Choices to get those laws passed, which is something that we can all be a part of. Let's see. So, okay, so question here says, so do your supporting people come from the person's location when the advance directive wishes are not being honored and respected? Exit guide counselors, how are they available, and is there an application process? So I guess maybe talking a little bit more about the guides and how that works.
Well, euphemistic, I never liked this word, but they call it a self-deliverance. Basically, it means that you end your own life with some peaceful, sure method. When you've reached the point where it's intolerable, you're suffering, it's irredeemable, there's no chance of survival. This is not for people who are depressed or suicidal, or a young woman who's thinking about dying because her boyfriend jilted her, that kind of thing. This is really for people focusing the most dire end-of-life situation. For those folks, Final Exit Network, since the beginning, has this process of application, and screening and counseling, lots and lots of counseling. Usually, the people that are on the telephone with the individual are also the people who will actually fly out to their location and be with them for an educational visit to make sure that people really know, what they're doing, and the reasons are justified from a medical, psychological, ethical, moral, spiritual perspective before the final decision is made. The individual can opt out at any point, at any time, for any reason. So it's entirely a voluntary process. What else can I say about it?
Okay.
The large number of people actually in this process of being counseled find other options, and the people oftentimes reach the point where just knowing that they have this option is enough. They have autonomy. They don't actually have to exercise it. But for those few people that do, it's the most humane, empowering thing that can happen.
Great. Let's see. Can you speak more about the requirement that prevents people from medical aid in dying?
Well, many of the neurological diseases. I'm working with a fellow. It's not ALS, but it's similar. To write a blog post for us that he is very close to being so disabled he would not be able to do what the law requires. You have, in the United States, as opposed to Canada, you have to do it yourself. You're prescribed a medication, you have to be able to ingest it yourself. That means you have to be able to swallow. That means you have to be able to manipulate some medications. And some of these diseases, people, even though they could live and suffer and die for many months longer than the 6-month regulation in the law, they're just not physically able to do it. And of course, everybody has to be legally, mentally competent in order to take advantage of those laws. That's precisely why we developed the supplementary advance directive for dementia. And that's exactly why we would send a lawyer out to contest that and enforce it if necessary.
Okay, great. And then let's see, can you provide an update on the lawsuit in California in which, unfortunately, they did not loosen the qualifications for medical aid in dying?
I'm not on top of that. I'm sorry, I can't give you more detail. I'm aware of it, but I'm not
and
sure.
That's a great, I know there's some people that have dropped in contact for Compassion and Choices.
Yeah.
That's where you can get all of the updates on what's happening in each states and jump on the team that's trying to get some of these laws passed.
Steve, another excellent resource is the DDNC, Death with Dignity National Center. It's full of practical statistical information on every single state and every single law. And DDNC, Death with Dignity National Center. And you can find answers to the questions like you just raised there very easily. DDNC.
Okay, and Patricia Dubroff says one of the challenges in DC Right to Die is finding a pharmacy that will provide the drugs. Any suggestions on that? And I'm not sure how all that works.
It's a problem. It was a problem originally in Oregon 20 years ago until they found physicians and pharmacies that would cooperate with the law. It came up again when California passed law, and it just recently came up again in New Mexico. A good friend of mine runs a organization that's helped get the law passed, but after the law is passed, the real work begins to try to find physicians and pharmacies and advise people how to utilize the law. So you need the law, but you also need a follow-on organization to help implement the law and make it actually accessible to people in that state.
I like this comment that everybody can read from Dixie Bosley in chat. Oh, actually, I'm going to cut and paste this in chat so everybody can read it. But one of the things that she says is that many of my patients hold a physician's opinion as gospel, and to please find a doctor who represents your choices about prolonging death or how you want to die. I mean, I think oftentimes we have relationships with healthcare practitioners that we don't really know what their philosophical viewpoint is, and if it doesn't match yours.
Steve, I got an interesting true life story on that. I was testifying in front of the legislature here in my state in favor of Compassion and Choices and Final Exit Network. We've kind of teamed up, and I was giving this passionate appeal to get this law in the state of Minnesota, and I sat down, and the next person who stood up was a physician, and he went on, slippery slope. If we pass this law, people will be killing grandma for her money, and we physicians are not killers. And I turned to my wife and I said, Ann, that's my cardiologist. And he was up there totally countering everything that I was saying. And I have to see him annually because he monitors the pacemaker and the ICD device that will shock me if I go into heart failure. And I got together with him and we both laughed and we had a drink and talked about the irony of this. And he told me, Gary, I am a very devout Catholic. I went to Notre Dame. I support a Catholic politician in this state. And I said, well, what about it? You know, are you going to turn this thing off when I tell you to, and it's my end? And he said, I will refer you to a colleague who won't have the same Catholic moral inhibitions that I have. So your point is really, really well taken. And I still see him. And every time we have this discussion, and it's really critical to know what your doctor or your medical institution or your hospice, the policies that they have. You may have to fight for this right. It won't happen automatically in many cases.
This Ryan Becker has a really good question, because anytime I've had a discussion like this, I've heard this one come up, is what would you recommend as a starting point or a starting resource for family members who are unsupportive? So Ryan, if I understand this correctly, sometimes you've got mom who says, you know, I'm in favor of death with dignity and this is what I'd like. But the children are like, Mom, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, well, we strongly recommend to have the talk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I've done in my family, not only my 2 daughters, but all my 3 granddaughters, we've gone over, you know, what my wishes are, both Ann and I, and they know exactly where we stand on this. So we don't have the situation where some relative will show up at the last minute and say, no, do everything. And that's tragic. It's painful. It sometimes stymies the situation because the hospital and the physicians want a clear answer on this. They will do what you want them to do, but they don't want it to be ambiguous and having many different voices on this. So our strong advice is to do your advance directive, discuss it several times, make sure everybody understands and will honor. It's your life after all. So even though they might not agree with you for religious or moral reasons, that doesn't give them the right to tell you what's going to happen to your life.
Great. Let's see. Shirley Paul says, how do I save the chat with all the great resources? And Shirley, I have to totally agree with you. chat is blowing up with so many fantastic resources. Such a great audience that we've got. I am adding the link there where the recording will be this afternoon, and under the recording, all the chat will be there. Gary's contact will be there. Everything you need. Let's see. Okay. Some folks are talking about getting the right to die laws passed in Maryland and DC, and I know Compassion and Choices is working on that. Somebody says or asks, most the medical orders for life-sustaining treatment, pink form on the refrigerator, posted any resources to help with emergency responders from taking you to the hospital. If most form expresses your wishes not to be taken to a hospital or receive intravenous or heroic treatment measures. So that most form, again, the whole advanced planning thing is very important. But if you're if people don't know where your document is, they don't know what your wishes are. So you've got to talk to your family about this. You've got to make it in a prominent place that if there was an emergency situation, that emergency would right. See that.
The post or most medical or physician order, it is an order, it's an instruction, and the hospital and the emergency response people will have to follow it. It's beyond and more powerful than the advanced directive. And usually you don't want that until the end is pretty much in sight. So you have to be careful how soon you put that up, but that's extremely important document.
And sorry.
Well, I also we're close to the end here. I want people to know that another resource is our Speakers Bureau. We have about 20 highly qualified speakers, ranging from hospice chaplain to physicians to folks like me who will either do a Zoom presentation, or as soon as the pandemic allows, we'll fly out to any community center or church or civic organization that would like a presentation on this topic, free of charge and custom tailored to the specific topic that the audience is, the needs and interests of that particular group. So you can access that also on our website. Just click on the Speakers Bureau, and it's quite user-friendly, easy to use.
Great. Okay. As we had said, we're wrapping things up. I had a couple of, it looks like Rosalind and Mike had their hands raised. So let's just see if that was by mistake, which sometimes it is. Great. If either Mike or Rosalind had something that they wanted to say, we can kind of close out with their comments. So I've prompted both of them to unmute if they had a question. But Gary, I'll turn it back to you for some closing words as we wrap up what I think is a wonderful discussion.
Well, I really appreciate being with you folks that are out there in the real world and providing services and helping people age in place and be consultants, and I'm sure there are all kinds of other providers of services. I want to say that these are more arrows to put in your quiver. They're free of charge. Please access them if they can be helpful to you. We're there for you. That's why we exist.
I love it. Thanks so much, Gary. But again, you're the star of the show and you're on the podium, but I can't emphasize how important the people in the audience are, the role that you play in these discussions. If it was just me and Gary here lecturing, it just reminded me of all those talks that we used to do at senior centers. Whereas we're really taking full advantage of these digital platforms. Nobody had to get in a car. And I just love the participation and the resources that you and the audience are providing with your questions and with your comments. But Gary, I look forward to continued relationship with you and your organization. Stay in touch with us, and if there's any updates that we need to know about, we would love to have you back on here.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Steve.
You bet. All right, we'll see everybody next week.